Welcome to the Relationship Recovery Podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way.
I have a very special guest today, Tina Swithin, author and founder of One Mom's Battle. Tina authored the book Divorcing a Narcissist, which is a series, and founded the website One Mom's Battle. The website started out as a blog where she shared her personal experience, and now is a resource for anybody going through a high-conflict divorce with a narcissist. Tina continues to champion children's rights through her family and court advocacy, and she is still working to raise awareness on the issues of the family court system, which she touches on during this podcast in detail. All of the resources discussed in the podcast will be in the show notes. So if you're listening to this and you're feeling pressure to jot some things down, just feel free to listen, to take it in, and to see how it relates to your experience. I really hope that this is helpful. Hi, Tina. Thank you for being with me today.
Hi. I'm honored to be here.
I know that there is so much that you do. Can you give me a quick introduction? I don't know if it can be quick because I know you have a lot going on about what you do and who you support.
Absolutely. I run a platform called One Mom's Battle. That is my main platform, and it's very much awareness of the issues within the family court system when someone leaves a toxic and abusive or a narcissistic partner. So it's very much about support and community, but also the unfortunate reality of needing strategy in the family court system, which doesn't come naturally to survivors. So it's a lot of education.
Yeah. What brought you into this work?
I refer to myself as the accidental author and advocate. I don't know that anyone would have willingly signed up to take on this mission, but I found myself in the family court system back in 2009 before anyone was talking about these issues. Now it's everyday conversation. We're reading about it in the media daily, which I'm grateful for. But back then, it was an even more isolating journey than it is now. And so it was about 2 years into my custody battle, and I was self-represented, meaning I could not afford to hire an attorney. So I was trying to navigate this system on my own, and nothing made sense. Common sense seemed to escape the family court system. And I was watching my children's safety constantly being trumped by my ex-husband's parental rights. Mm-hmm. And so out of frustration, I started a blog titled One Mom's Battle. And just with the goal of allowing my friends and family to follow my story, because I found that even the well-meaning people in my life, when I was trying to explain to them what was happening in court, they were looking at me sideways. And I could tell some people were questioning, there has to be more to the story. This doesn't make sense. And I agree. It doesn't make sense. Nothing makes sense about this. And so I started the blog just in an effort to share what was my day-to-day journey. I remember at one point, my dad said to me, "You march into that courtroom, you tell the judge X, Y, and Z that you are not putting those little girls in his car next weekend." And I thought, that's not the way it works, Dad. I know you mean well, and you're my
I wish it was that easy. Yeah.
Right. I would love to do that. I do it in my mind all the time. I tell the judge what I think, but you can't actually say that. And so I started this blog, and then about 6 months into sharing my journey, I was somewhat, you could say, discovered by Christy Brinkley, who at the time I did not realize was following my blog because it was really the only thing out there talking about narcissistic abuse and the reality of what happens in the court system. So she got a huge media spotlight put on her as a result of her own divorce and custody battle. And then she started directing people to my blog and sharing excerpts from my blog. And so it kind of blew up. And I went from just writing for friends and family to, having this international audience. And what I found was that, when I started it, I thought I was the only person in the world going through this, which is why I titled it One Mom's Battle. But I quickly found that there were people all over the world going through the exact same journey. It was almost playbook.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I remember first discovering your website and reading it and feeling like it was written for me, like reading like each word felt like it was written like for exactly what I was going through and was touching on a lot of the issues of the struggles I was having or the things that didn't make sense. And I remember downloading your canned responses, and which is a resource that's on onemomsbattle.com. And I started to use them because and I would like take them to get like put two together and like move them around a little bit. But it felt like for the first time I had a tool, to use for these very specific situations that I don't think a lot of people understand.
Absolutely not. And what I find is that, even well-meaning people in the realm of domestic violence advocacy, coalitions, they don't even truly understand what's happening to people once they move from, feeling so brave that they left this toxic situation to the reality of you can't protect your kids. So many of us leave these situations, regardless of what type of abuse it is, to give our kids a better life and to secure peace. And what we find is that, I have people all the time who reach out and say, I've read your story or I'm reading these stories and I'm not leaving. I would rather stay and be abused than put my children through this new reality. And that is heartbreaking when we have domestic violence victims, abuse victims deciding to stay because they feel they can protect their children better. It's a crisis.
Yeah. When you said that, like I felt that in my chest because I have clients who say that I'm going to stay because the reality of if I leave of what my partner will do and how my partner's parents might treat me and what the effect that will have on the children is far more painful and scary than me staying in this environment, which is heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking. And I try to explain to people, even knowing what I know about the system, I would have still made the decision to leave because yes, you do feel when you're in that you can protect them better, shelter them better than once you walk into family court and your hands are tied. But I still believe from, a cellular level that leaving is the right thing to do because then we have the opportunity to show our kids what healthy looks like, even if it's 30% of the time, even if it's 50% of the time, whatever, the court talks about children in terms of percentages as if they were a retirement account or an investment property. And, so I cringe when we talk about human life in terms of percentage. But, regardless of what your timeshare is with your child, having the opportunity to show them and model what healthy looks like. Otherwise, they're growing up with their foundation that this is what marriage or what a relationship looks like. And the most heartbreaking emails I receive on any given day are from the women who did stay, because back when they were going through this, there were no resources. No one was talking about this. And so they stayed believing that was the right thing to do. And now their children are either victims of domestic abuse or they're the abuser. And so, it's keeping the cycle going if we don't leave. And that's but I understand why people would struggle with that decision.
Yeah. Yeah. In retrospect, I think that when I left my situation, I think this is true for a lot of my clients. You left and you kind of thought like, okay, I'm out, we're divorced, it's done. And then it's not done, and I know from reading about your story, you spent a lot of time back in court. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I think that goes kind of hand in hand with post-separation abuse, a concept that not many people understand.
Right. So what we know about domestic violence, it's about power and control. And that power and control doesn't just vanish when the relationship ends or when the ink on the divorce decree is dry.
Mm-hmm.
The need for control just transitions into the family court system. That becomes the new platform. And most of the time, the children become the pawns or the weapons to the abuser because they know that is the way to go for our jugular. They know that is the way to hurt us the most. And so I know I can, from my own personal journey, but also in talking to thousands of people over the years, I went into it very naive, believing that because he had never expressed interest in the kids during the relationship, never changed a diaper, never got up with them at night, unless there was a camera on or an audience present, he was completely MIA. And who I thought of as my co-parent during my marriage was my nanny. And so I just naively believed that when the divorce, started unfolding, that he would maintain what had already been established. And that's not the way it works. I had a very rude awakening. And because he knows that the children are the way to hurt me or control me, most of these individuals either come for 50-50 custody or full custody. I've always maintained he would have rather had a nanny raise them than me just because he knew how to hurt me the deepest.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the most frustrating part of having to advocate for yourself in the court system?
I think the realization that to the court, this was just a business transaction, but to me, this was my life and my children. And the inability on their part to recognize what he was doing and that his motivation did not come from truly wanting to be a part of my kids' lives. And the realization that no matter what they were being subjected to, abuse, trauma, his parental rights continued to trump their right to safety. And that you both get lumped into the high conflict category, even though research shows it only takes one person to create a high conflict situation. There's a study out of Santa Clara University, which is really the first of its kind, and it talks about the high conflict person in the family court realm. And, even if they have a perceived win, even if you give them everything they're asking for, it's still not going to be enough. And so, it is a very uneven playing field, and a very unfair one where abusers seem to win. They seem to be prioritized because they are louder there and they present better than abuse victims most of the time. So we're in a family court system that is, they're not even trained on the 101 of domestic violence, let alone the intricacies of these, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, coercive control, all of these issues. Post-separation abuse, there is literally a playbook. We developed the post-separation abuse wheel. It's postseparationabuse.com. And it was very much modeled after my experience, but it is the experience of thousands of people around the world.
Yeah. You touched on something important, which was coercive control. Can you define coercive control?
It is a way to maintain control without using physical force. It's making someone financially dependent on you, which was a huge theme in my relationship. It is making someone doubt their own ability to go out into the world and thrive. And it can be, more direct threats. However, most of it is so subconscious, subliminal, that it's not what we would recognize as overt abuse. It's you don't even realize what's happening to you until you leave the situation and are able to leave the fog and look back and see the playbook from isolation to financial control, keeping you from friends and family because they're not good enough. They're this, they're that, the other, it's this slow build towards isolation and dependency on them.
Yeah. Why do you think the court is so blind to post-separation abuse?
We have hairstylists in Tennessee who have more training on domestic violence than family court judges. That is a fact. And, I cringe when I watch these these media stories about how wonderful it is that we're training hairstylists and beauticians to recognize domestic violence. And I'm thinking, great, well, that's wonderful. But then who's going to help this person? Because most family court judges can literally take the bench with zero training on domestic violence. And if they have any training at all, it is so 101 that my 15-year-old could do a better job of educating someone. So, I believe there's a huge victim blaming mentality in the family court system. My judge said to me verbally out loud, "You married this person, you had 2 children with him. This isn't my problem to fix." And even if they don't, and that was a huge gut punch to hear. Even if they don't verbally say that, I believe most of them believe that, you chose this path. And that is so barbaric and archaic and victim blaming, but it is what's happening. And so much of the post-separation abuse is hard to prove. It's not what it's what you can prove in family court. And a lot of it is so covert and hearsay because so much of it you're hearing from the kids what's happening. And then that, doesn't fly in court. They need, their hands are tied by the law and they need solid proof and evidence. And that is hard to produce in these situations.
Yeah, I totally agree. And while you were speaking, the idea of child's best interest popped up in my head. Something we hear a lot in the court system and in these legal battles. And it feels to me that whether it is custodial parent or safe parent or healthy parent is probably knows very well what those child's best interests are, but it gets so convoluted in the court system and I've always had a big issue with this idea of the judge is taking the stance of the child's best interest, but they don't know the child. And These aren't situations where we bring the child in. In a lot of cases, I have a few clients with older kids that they're old enough to speak for themselves. They're old enough to have a preference. They're old enough to even advocate to what they want. And they'll tell their safe parent. The safe parent tries to deliver it to the other parent or the court system, and they get shot down, and they actually get more abuse, in my opinion, because they're being told they're wrong, and it's costing time and money and sleep and health to get there.
Right. And you're accused of coaching your child to say these things and not encouraging the relationship. And it's like, I remember going back to the beginning and my daughters were 2 and 4 and they had zero bond with this person because he had never been a part of their lives, even though technically we all lived under the same roof. But now, because they aren't running to him and jumping into his arms, it's being pinned on me that I'm not doing enough to encourage the relationship. And I'm thinking, I'm doing everything in my power, but this person is very much a virtual stranger. Put their nanny out there, put their aunt out there, anybody else in our family, they will go running and leap into that person's arm because they have an authentic bond. And when the family court system, and I think a huge part of the problem is there are some parents, maybe it's 2 healthy parents, maybe one of them prioritize work or whatever in life, and divorce can be a wake-up call. So maybe they weren't actively participating in the child rearing. And then divorce happens, and it's a wake up call that, hey, I need to step up to the plate and have a relationship with my kids. And they are authentically trying. The court gives the benefit of the doubt that everybody falls into that category. So, that is, we're all lumped under the same umbrella. And that's not always the case. I applaud if I do believe that if both parents are healthy, they should be a part of the child's life. But for many kids, I don't believe they need two parents in their lives.
Yeah. Are you seeing any change in the family court system?
Well, it's a slow process. We just recently this year, VAWA was passed, Violence Against Women's Act, finally, after quite a while. And with that came Caden's Law, which is the federal government for the very first time recognizing that we have a problem in the family court system. And Caden's Law was named after Caden Mancuso, who was a little girl, 7 years old, out of Pennsylvania, brutally murdered by her father, despite her mother's ongoing pleas with the court to protect her. And so now a huge superhighway has been paved in the world of advocacy, but now it needs to be brought to each state. And this past year, the National Safe Parents Organization was launched, and it's a group of the top advocates in the country who have come together under one roof to basically mobilize people into their own states to bring Caden's Law. So we've got a lot of work to do, and it's it's chipping away at a huge problem.
Yeah.
But it gives me hope. It does. It's, again, with the federal government finally recognizing that we have a crisis, it sets a different tone and foundation.
Yeah. And I believe it's November. That's National Safe Parents Awareness Month. Is that right?
So yes, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And then November, we have claimed as Family Court Awareness Month.
Family Court Awareness, yeah.
Yeah. And so those dovetail together, as we've talked about here, because domestic violence just transfers to the family court system. So it's a natural segue. And last year was our second year, and we had almost 225 cities, counties, and states across the country who proclaimed November as Family Court Awareness Month. So this is our third year. We have billboards going up all across the country. It's being led by Sandra Ross from California Protective Parents Association and Annie Kenny, who is an inspirational child advocate. And it's in good hands, and we are moving mountains when it comes to awareness, because the reality is, like most of us, the community members, the people, our neighbors, our PTA presidents, they don't know that we even have a problem in the family court system. So it's a way for survivors to raise awareness within their own communities, which we all know this is such an isolating journey. It's a way for them to be seen and heard in their community. And what we're finding is that when we're going to city council meetings, board of supervisor meetings, and talking about this and accepting these proclamations, they're all looking at us going, wait, what do you mean kids aren't being prioritized in family court? What can we do to link arms with you and change this? So we're developing allies all over the country, and it's been an amazing thing.
Yeah. How would somebody get involved with advocacy if they wanted to?
So I would encourage them to go to nationalsafeparents.org and join the community. And then it's within that community, it's organized by state. So we're mobilizing state by state and giving people the tools and the language that they need to start reaching out to their representatives, get on their radar, get meetings set up, and start talking about getting Caden's Law implemented.
Awesome. I'll put the link in the show notes of this podcast if anybody wants to follow it.
Wonderful.
I'm going to take a little bit of a right turn and talk about the dynamic, like parenting within the dynamic, the narcissistic dynamic. And I work with a lot of clients who experience counter-parenting.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the common signs that somebody is counter-parenting?
Yeah. So, the way I like to describe it is that the family court system expects us to co parent. And meanwhile, you've got the other side counter parenting. They're undermining the safe parents' parenting abilities, decisions. If I make sure my kids are in bed at 9 o'clock at night, we know that the other parent is going to allow them to stay up till 11 o'clock at night just to spite me. If there is a decision that needs to be made about signing little Sally up for soccer in August, I can guarantee you my emails will not be answered. I'm going to risk, missing the deadline. And it gets even more, serious than that. It can be withholding or mismanaging support payments. It can be, going anything that you are passionate about as a parent, they are going to do the opposite just to hurt you. Your rules, if, a lot of it is going to be at safe parents' house, we have a lot of rules, we have structure, blah, blah, blah. And I am the Disneyland parent, and I am going to do everything in my power to ensure that there's conflict between you and the child.
Yeah. In order to be with counter parenting, do you recommend leaning more into parallel parenting?
Yes and no. So I think mentally we have to be in the place of parallel parenting. However, and in my opinion, until the court decides that this case, these two people can only parallel parent, people make a huge mistake being proactive and going down that path, because to the court, it makes them look like they cannot sing Kumbaya together on Sundays. It makes them look like, they're just going down doing their own thing and not communicating really until the court decides that they are not capable of co-parenting. I work with clients to show up and be the best co-parent that the court has ever seen, regardless of what the other side is doing. And I have this vantage point from sitting in the court and watching cases that I know nothing about, and putting myself in the shoes of the judge. And people lose sight of the fact that the judge doesn't know either party, and they're painting a picture of who you are, who the other party is, and then the picture in general. And so if somebody just makes a unilateral decision to start parallel parenting, they can often present as part of the problem.
So what would you recommend then as a middle ground, or like what would be the way to be with someone who is counter parenting? If we take your example of like the soccer sign up, you
Right.
email, you tell them the cost, you're supposed to tell them, they're supposed to split it. They don't reply to you. You're going to miss the deadline. Your kid is asking every day if she's going to play soccer. You sign her up because it's getting close to that deadline. You don't want her to be impacted. And then you're being told by the other parent, now you're in contempt because you didn't get his approval. If we take that idea of like showing up as the best co-parent for the court system, how would you manage that situation?
I would be very strategic in my communication leading up to soccer signups. And so sometimes, the amount of energy that we have to expend on these issues is, it's a lot. So it's being ahead constantly and thinking ahead of them so that you're not constantly playing defense. So if I knew that soccer signups are every August, I would probably start communicating in April, and I would send an email and just say, soccer signups are coming up in August. I want to make sure that we are able to get her signed up. If I don't hear back from you by July 1st, I'm going to assume we're both in agreement. If you're dealing with someone who is constantly stonewalling or ghosting or whatnot, that's a good way to do it, because you've set a deadline and then said, if I don't hear from you, I'm going to go ahead and make this decision and assume we're both together on this. And that can be successful with certain types. There's within the label of narcissistic, there's so many different types. And a lot of what I work on with people is profiling who they are specifically up against, because the strategy is going to change depending. But in general terms. And then if they come back and say, no, I'm not in agreement, it would be, okay, well, I want to understand your position. Can you help me to understand why you don't want Sally to play soccer in August? And usually they have no, they cannot come up with any reason. So the difficult part in this is that if they are not in agreement and you share legal custody, if you go forward and do it without their agreement, you are going to be painted poorly in the eyes of the court. So my kids didn't play soccer for years, and they're now in high school. And I will tell you, it's had a huge effect on them, because when everybody is on the different teams and whatnot and have been playing since they were 4, this is one of the the difficult fallout situations from that. So it's documenting those things. So then if I knew that this is the type of person I'm up against and they're constantly co-parenting and it's having an effect on my child, I would be building a documentation just on this topic. So then I can go into the court and ask for complete decision-making when it comes to extracurricular activities. It's really hard to get legal custody across the board, but I would choose, if medical issues aren't ongoing, then I would focus on that, build my case around that. If it's extracurriculars, then that's what I would be building a case. And so it is very much slowly chipping away at the issues.
I like that idea of putting a focus for the documentation on just that issue and allowing your mind just to focus on that one thing and see the patterns that are coming up there rather than the whole breadth of, the separation agreement.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. In my experience, documentation in my specific case, it didn't take me very far. I had a lot of emails documented of like hypocritical statements and issues, and I didn't feel like the court read it. Is that
right?
Did you have that experience too?
Yes. So I'll say, my case didn't really start turning around until about the 5-year mark. 2 years, they started, kind of leaning in a little bit more and ordering custody evaluations and things like that. In my experience, the court they don't have the capacity to sit down and really go through, and you're put on this distorted scale. When I sat in court and had to listen to testimony about a 3-year-old who was strangled and is in ICU, and then I walk in and I'm upset because I can't get my 4-year-old on the soccer team, they're going to look at me like you don't even register on our scale of importance. So, because they're not trauma informed, because they don't understand these things, we get put on this skewed scale and they get so desensitized to the issues. So where I see documentation really help people is if you have really been building for years and you have identified the areas or the categories that are significant in your case, and then really build your case around that. And then it's not usually the judge, it's somebody else who's been appointed. And we hear horror stories about custody evaluators, minors counsel. It makes a big difference who it is. And that's where learning your local system so that you know who all of the players are and who to avoid and who to move towards. I'll tell you, I had a custody evaluation in 2009 that was pointless, a waste of time and money. But then the one that I had in 2013, because of my documentation, that is what protected my kids. Yes. So it's and so much of it becomes how you present the information, how your own healing journey, your own trauma work, because we know abusers typically present better than survivors. And so you should never have to use strategy in this. It doesn't come naturally to us and it shouldn't have to. But unfortunately, that there is some realities to that.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something earlier about profiling the different kinds of narcissists. Can you give a very quick description of them? So if someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, I didn't know there's more than one, how can I learn more about it, that they can identify with it? I know it's a deep topic, but maybe like
Yeah.
a few defining characteristics.
Yeah, I mean, if I had a client that came to me and she is divorcing someone who is in law enforcement, we know enough about that profession. And I have law enforcement officers in my family who I love and adore. However, there are characteristics and traits. There does tend to be a high need for control, image. Those are my first two profiling. This person probably has control issues. They are likely more covert. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're the really loud, one. I've dealt with somebody who owned a health food store, and he was very much the very covert, communal, doing good deeds in the community, hosting domestic violence events at his restaurant. So, there's so many different types. And so, and so it's really getting into the trenches with somebody and going, no, let's look at their childhood. Let's look at how they were in high school, what triggers they have, what abuses they've suffered. When do you see their mask drop? And really looking at them almost like the FBI would profile a criminal. It really, because you never know where there's going to be an opportunity to say to your attorney, on this topic, this is where this person's mask drops. And so getting them on the stand and poking around this topic, we're likely going to see who they really are behind that mask.
Have you come across attorneys that understand narcissism?
The problem right now is that when I first started, no one was using this word. Now it's a search term on people's websites.
It's a buzzword. Yeah.
It's a buzzword. They use it for search engine optimization to draw, to their website. I have attorneys tell me all the time, people call my office and say, have you read Tina Swithin's book? That's what's happening to me. And so do they claim to understand it? Yes. Are they really skilled and educated on it? Very few, in how it plays out. For example, the most money I see people spend on attorneys is behind the scenes negotiating. And there's an attorney out of Texas that I have connected with. And he said, the day I meet someone, I start preparing for their trial. And that's because he truly does understand these things more than most. And so, you've got that where, and these are case numbers for them. These are business transactions. And so you've got a lot who, they don't really want it to end because that's constant payments for their office. So most of them claim to at this point. I think very few do.
That was definitely my experience and I tried to find someone who had like they had a background in like I was trying to see like, oh, did they write a blog? Is there a paper? Like I tried to kind of, like you said about the FBI, like I tried to see how do they prove that they know something? Because I spent a lot of time almost convincing my lawyer that this wasn't natural. Like I remember sending her an email one day saying, I don't even feel like you're on my side sometimes. Right. Like I am, like you are so caught up in not pissing off his lawyer when I don't care about pissing off his lawyer. Like right. This is $20,000 so far and we're not done. And we've been divorced for years and now I can't buy a house for my daughter and I'm arguing with you on the phone about ways to not piss off his lawyer. I was just like, what are we doing?
Right. Yeah. Right. And then there's another side to that is even if the attorney does get it, like I know of attorneys who have degrees in psychology and they truly get this, but then they will say our hands are tied by the reality of the system and the lack of knowledge. And, even if you go and get the other party diagnosed as a narcissistic personality disorder, it doesn't even matter in the courtroom because there's no research out there. So I've seen diagnosed antisocials, sociopaths, and narcissists get 50-50 custody simply because the court doesn't understand. So even if an attorney gets it, it's, they have to get it enough to help you navigate it behind the scenes support your need for boundaries, how you communicate, and be able to advocate for you. But often their hands are tied by the reality of the system as well. There's so many different challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. In the last round of court stuff that I had to go through, I had a different lawyer, and I said to her, I briefed her on what happened previously and how I felt. And then I said, I understand sometimes things can't change. I understand the court is going to advocate for something, based on what the court does, but I need you to help me see where I am within my rights, because everything is so convoluted. And that I found that to be very helpful. And it also softened our relationship a bit. Like she started to see patterns, I think. And so when she got to see patterns in the email communication or even in the way things happened, it almost felt like she could put together those pieces and advocate for me in a different way than it was happening before.
Right, right. And you have to have somebody who isn't afraid of making waves. And those are the rare unicorns out there, because the reality is, these are their colleagues, even the judge and the opposing counsel. I've received emails from people saying, I just saw a photo posted on social media of my attorney and opposing counsel vacationing together in the Bahamas. Like, what can I do? And I'm like, unfortunately, that is what many of us are up against in the system. They're colleagues, and it's challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to touch on with you was how we can take care of ourselves, the parents, we can take care of ourselves when we're so triggered. I reflect back to maybe like 2018. I spent probably that entire summer having arguments in my head, being scared, being on edge, not sleeping, being at the beach with my daughter, but being so stuck in thought rather than engaging with her. And I've come such a long way since then. But what is the advice that you give someone when they're losing so much of themselves to the system?
Being connected to a trauma-informed therapist who really understands these things is critical. Learning to compartmentalize it so that it doesn't consume your every waking moment. I run lots of support groups through One Mom's Battle, and I even tell some of my clients, stay out of those groups. If that is how you're spending your free time, you have to change course, because you need to have it on your calendar where Tuesdays from 9 a.m. until 1 p.m. I'm going to work on my documentation. I'll spend a 30-minute section in a support group, whatnot. But if that's what you're laying in bed at 10 p.m. before you go to sleep, looking through OMB support groups or whatever it is, shut it off, because it's compartmentalizing it so that you can be present in those moments. And I'll tell you, all these years later, my daughter's almost 18, and I look back at photos and go, I was there because I'm in the photo, but I don't even remember being there because I was so consumed by all of this. And if you don't feel that way from time to time, I'd want to check your pulse, because you're human. These are your babies, and nature intended for you to protect them. But there is a reality to not letting this take over every single part. Gratitude journals were huge for me. I did those. I did it with my kids. I'd sit at the table every night and ask my kids, what is your high, medium, and low for the day? Getting that. So let's talk about the high of the day and focus on the positives wherever you can find them, because otherwise it just all starts to feel dark. And it is, they're harsh realities.
Yeah. Something I recommend to my clients is that we can work with where you are. So just because you don't feel ready to go get your nails done, or you don't have the time right now or the money for a massage, why don't we work on what actually makes you feel good? So maybe it is just taking time to blow out your hair, or putting on mascara, or, putting on a different outfit, even if you're at home, like little things that can help you feel more like you, so we can begin to build that muscle of self-awareness and the self-care.
Absolutely. And reframing how we think of self-care. I mean, it can be that you wake up 10 minutes before everyone else just to enjoy the quiet and sit with a cup of coffee, and anywhere you can refill your tank, because we know, this is uphill and we're running on fumes a lot of the time. So it's constantly thinking, how can I fill my tank so that no matter what hits, I'm equipped to navigate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for this, Tina. This was so informative.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Do you mind just closing out where people can reach you?
Yeah. OneMomsBattle.com is the hub of everything I do. FamilyCourtAwarenessMonth.org is our November advocacy website. And then I encourage everyone for advocacy related things to join us at NationalSafeParents.org.
Thank you so much.